It wasn't supposed to end like this. Black Sabbath had fought through breakups, addictions, and endless tours, but the moment that changed everything for Ozzy Osbourne came quietly and brutally. One moment, he was the wild frontman who ruled stages around the world. The next, he was being told, not asked, that his time was up. Geezer Butler, Sabbath's bass player and Ozzy's longtime friend, would later admit that what happened to Ozzy wasn't a surprise. In his eyes, Ozzy's downfall wasn't just bad luck. It was the result of years of choices, reckless, unapologetic, and often self-destructive. Back in the late 70s, the band was already falling apart. The music world was changing fast. Punk had exploded, heavy metal was shifting, and even Sabbath's own sound was starting to feel like a shadow of its early glory. But the biggest problem wasn't outside the band. It was right there in the room. Ozzy was drinking more than ever, not just a few beers before the show, entire bottles. There were nights when he couldn't even remember the set list. Geezer, who had known Ozzy since their teenage days in Birmingham, watched the man he once saw as unstoppable crumble under the weight of fame and addiction. But in the strange world of rock and roll, bad behavior didn't always mean bad business. Ozzy's chaotic energy still drew crowds. Fans loved the madness. The problem was that behind the scenes, the band couldn't function. Writing sessions were a mess. Recording was slow torture. Arguments became normal, and when Geezer looked across the stage, he no longer saw a singer. He saw someone lost, unreachable. One night, after yet another disastrous rehearsal, the rest of the band had the conversation no one wanted to have. Tony Iommi, the quiet but decisive guitarist, finally said what everyone was thinking. Ozzy had to go. It was the kind of decision that would haunt them, and in Geezer's mind, it was one Ozzy had brought on himself. Still, for all his frustration, Geezer didn't hate Ozzy. They had been friends since before the fame, before the chaos. But as he watched Ozzy walk out for the last time, he felt something strange. Not anger, not sadness, but a grim sense of inevitability. He knew Ozzy wouldn't disappear quietly. This was a man who thrived on chaos, who lived for attention, for danger. And sure enough, the story of Ozzy Osbourne was far from over. What came next would shock everyone, including Geezer himself, because Ozzy's downfall was also the beginning of his rebirth. The breaking point. By the late 70s, the cracks in Black Sabbath had grown into deep fractures. The band had risen from the streets of Birmingham to become one of the biggest heavy metal acts in the world. But fame had brought more than just success. It had brought chaos, exhaustion, and a dangerous level of excess. And in the center of it all was Ozzy Osbourne. Geezer Butler, the band's bassist and lyricist, had known Ozzy since their teenage years. He'd seen the shy, working-class kid turn into a frontman who could hold tens of thousands of people in the palm of his hand. But he'd also seen something else, the way fame and drugs were slowly pulling Ozzy apart. In the early days, Ozzy's wild behavior had been part of his charm. He was unpredictable on stage, a force of pure energy, and fans loved it. But offstage, that same unpredictability started to become dangerous. Ozzy would miss rehearsals, forget lyrics, and sometimes disappear entirely before important shows. The rest of the band would be left scrambling, unsure if their singer would even show up. It wasn't just the music that was suffering. Geezer noticed how the bond between the four members, Ozzy, Tony Iommi, Bill Ward, and himself, was weakening. The long tours had worn them down, and the constant partying had taken its toll. At first, they'd all joined in, but as time passed, some of them began to pull back. Ozzy didn't. In fact, his habits only got worse. One night, after a particularly bad show where Ozzy slurred his way through the set, the band gathered in a hotel room. Geezer could still remember the silence in that room. No one wanted to be the first to speak, but they all knew something had to change. The problem was, no one knew how to say it to Ozzy. Tony, the band's guitarist and de facto leader, finally broke the silence. "We can't keep going like this," he said. The others nodded, but Ozzy wasn't on. In the room to hear it. He was out somewhere. No one even knew where. That moment planted a seed in their minds. They had to make a decision, even if it meant breaking up the band they'd built from nothing. Geezer admitted years later that it was one of the hardest things he'd ever gone through. On one hand, Ozzy was more than just a singer, he was a brother. On the other, Black Sabbath was falling apart, and if they didn't act, the whole thing would collapse. The turning point came in 1979 during recording sessions for what would become Heaven and Hell. Ozzy was showing up less and less, and when he did, he was too out of it to contribute. Geezer and the others were forced to face the truth. Ozzy wasn't just struggling, he was dragging the band down with him. They didn't know it yet, but the decision they were about to make would change the course of heavy metal history forever.